Part 109. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1081. Chapter 1081. The Power of the Prince in Power. Tao Yuxian looked at the banknotes and said, "The queen is so desperate, I'm afraid this battle won't be easy to win. As a woman, she knows best what dowry means, it is dependence and even more a retreat. Even though her life in the palace has been unsatisfactory in recent years, the queen has never touched the dowry, but now she has taken it out. This determination has to be admired. But it also means that in this battle, not only does the third prince have no way out, but they also have no way out. Either you win or you lose. Either life or death." Fan Qinjiao said, "This time the queen asked Yuanyu to follow me out of the palace." The third prince seemed particularly calm. I'm afraid he had already made a plan in his heart. Hua Yaoding sighed, "The third prince is different from the prince. The third prince was raised strictly by concubine Yu from an early age. The more such a person is, the more rebellious he is. During this time, the main city seems to be calm. Concubine Yu, I thought I had persuaded the third prince, but in fact, as far as I know, the third prince had already started recruiting troops aggressively. It seems that the Queen Mother asked the Hua family to adopt Yuanyu, which was the trigger of the whole thing. In fact, no matter whether there is this incident or not, it is unavoidable that the third prince will force the palace." Fan Qinjiao frowned and asked, "My grandfather is going to Huaishang this time. Is it still too late to bring my uncles back with the Hua family army?" Hua Yaoding nodded, "Those soldiers and horses we bought are used to being scattered. How can they compare with the regular army? No matter how eager the third prince is to force the palace, he must unify these soldiers and horses first, but it's better to be careful during this time with your grandmother." Fan Qinjiao quickly calmed down and listened carefully. "Grandpa, please speak. Although the emperor has been hiding his body, and even the queen and the prince don't know the specific situation, according to my understanding of the emperor, once the new year is over and Ji Hongliao is nowhere to be found, he must announce that you are with him. Grandma went to the palace to heal. Now that the emperor is delaying the announcement, he is also considering the turmoil in the court. But if Ji Hongliao is not found for a long time, the emperor will really be afraid. When that time comes, the emperor will only consider his own life and death, so how can he care about other people? Selfish people will always be selfish. Judging from the emperor's current body, I'm afraid he will only let you and your grandmother out of the palace the moment you close your eyes. But when that time comes, will you really be able to leave safely? Now that the third prince is watching with such eagerness, I am afraid that by then he would have led his troops into the palace." Fan Qinjiao nodded and said, "I will definitely keep in mind what my grandfather said today. This trip on the Huihe River must be a lot of hardships. I also hope that my grandfather will return safely. I am waiting with the Hua family to meet my grandfather and uncle. We are reunited." Actually, Fan Qinjiao had thought of these things in advance, so she had planned to start arranging them after the new year. It is always necessary to be prepared to avoid danger. As the new year passed, the emperor's condition became more and more serious. As the matter of Fan Qinjiao's adoption of Yuanyu spread in the court, the ministers simply followed this trend and collectively recommended the prince to handle government affairs for the time being. Naturally, the three princes and his party voted against it, but the situation in the court had all shifted towards the prince. The three princes and his party could only watch as the piles of memorials were all moved to the East Palace. On the second day after Bailey Fengming took over the government affairs, the trial of the second prince finally came from Dali Temple. Constructing a Taoist temple in secret is unforgivable, and the assassination of the crown princess is an unforgivable crime. Finally, that day, the second prince was taken to the Meridian Gate and beheaded. Concubine Lu Shu fainted immediately after hearing the news. Concubine Han Xian came to the outside of Yu Yu Palace with her last breath, still thinking of asking concubine Yu to intercede. Concubine Yu wants the second prince to be a scapegoat, so where can she meet him? Aren't you leaving yet? Concubine Yu asked as she looked at the person entering the door. Mother John lowered her head and said, no matter what the old slave says, concubine Han Xian will not listen. She insists on seeing the concubine. Since you like kneeling so much, just keep kneeling outside. I want to see how long she can kneel. Concubine Yu frowned and was equally upset. The second prince has become a scapegoat. Although the evidence from Dali Temple is conclusive, can the queen and prince really find nothing? Now that we have reached this point, concubine Yu certainly knows that neither the prince nor the queen is a fool, otherwise she would not be able to get rid of her now. After careful calculation, Dali Temple has not made a decision yet. Why did the second prince have to be killed as soon as the prince took over the government? Is this trying to appease the people, or is he trying to give us a disincentive? Yun Yu, who was sitting beside him, said. He also frowned. I usually pretend to be weak, but now I dare to provoke me before I really have the power. I really underestimated the prince. Concubine Yu's fingertips holding the teacup were turning white, and she said no, anger is fake. Because of the second prince's matter, some ministers in the third prince's party were already distracted from her son. This time the prince dealt with the second prince so vigorously and resolutely, maybe he was killing the chicken to scare the monkeys. Once the third prince and his party are all panicked, who else in the court will continue to support her son? In this way, even if his son really succeeds in forcing the palace, he may not be able to convince the public in the court. You should leave the palace now and ask Zer if she has any plans. Concubine Yu looked at Yunyu and said, now her son's side is the overall situation, and she can't act rashly even if she can't swallow it. I understand. Concubine Yunyu nodded, stood up and left the palace. In the courtyard, it was concubine Han Xian who was kneeling on the ground when she saw Princess Yunyu coming out. Although she didn't say anything, her eyes staring at Yunyu made Yunyu feel inexplicably flustered. Yunyu hurriedly got into the carriage and headed towards the third prince's residence. Her heart was beating fast and her face was ugly. She was not afraid of concubine Han Xian's eyes. She was afraid that in the future, everyone would use the prince's methods to treat them. Show that look. In the study room of the third prince's residence, Bailey Rongs was discussing with a group of staff when he saw Yunyu walking in with a pale face. Bailey Rongs first dispersed the staff in the room, then looked at Yunyu and said, but what happened? Yunyu sat down on her own, looked at her younger brother standing not far away and asked in a deep voice, haven't you heard about the second prince being beheaded? End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1082. Chapter 1082. Kinjao, you have to hold on this time. Bailey Rongs choked up. Of course he had heard about it. Otherwise, why would he have gathered all the staff together, other than to find a way to appease these people's hearts? Yunyu looked at her younger brother's expression, frowned and said, you have also seen that after what happened to the second prince, how many people are still willing to stand by your side? The mother-in-law is worried about your plans, and even everyone in the palace has learned to endure humiliation and survive. My mother-in-law wants me to ask you what you mean, but I think you must not remain silent about this matter. Bailey Rongs said with a gloomy face, so what if the prince is proud of the spring breeze now? Now the large group of people has taken shape. In a few days, they can secretly set off to the main city. Of course Yunyu understood his plan. Are you really planning to continue like this? You have to think about it carefully. If the situation develops like this, even if you really force your father to write a suicide note, who in the court will really convince you? Princess Yunyu reminded. Bailey Rongs frowned and said, now all my experiences and deployments are outside. Even if I really want to fight the prince now, how can I win? Yunyu sneered, where have all your previous schemes gone? Is it true that the only way to get back the benefits from the prince is by facing each other with swords? Bailey Rongs was suddenly startled. Seeing that he had really figured it out, Yunya breathed a long sigh of relief. Before you force the palace, you can't let the prince grasp what the people want. In this way, after you force the palace, the courtiers will be grateful to you for settling the matter. This is a turbulent time. Bailey Rongs looked at Yunya thoughtfully and said, I do have a way, but it just needs to alarm the palace. In the past, when my father was still strong, he was not qualified to reach out to the palace, and now he is even less qualified. Yunya understood immediately. You just need to express your thoughts. You don't need to worry about things in the palace. My mother and I will make arrangements for you. Bailey Rongs walked to Yunya's side and lowered his voice and said, since the prince, it's better for us to wait until the matter is completed. Not only the civil and military officials in the court, but also Fan Kinjao will look at the prince coldly. Yunya Wenzi rolled her eyes a few times, and then showed a satisfied smile. Your idea is very good. I will go and discuss with the Queen Mother now how to do it. After Yunya finished speaking, she stood up and left. Others don't know Fan Kinjao's abilities, but Yunya still knows it. Even though Fan Kinjao has been hiding himself to cover his edge, without Fan Kinjao's help, how could Prince Ren have made it all the way to where he is today? Thinking of Fan Kinjao and the women in the third prince's mansion, Yunya couldn't help but sigh. If Fan Kinjao could stand beside her brother, everything today would be different. Bailey Rongs was sitting on a chair in the study room, with a sinister smile on his lips. Didn't the prince talk very nicely that day? In this case, he gave the prince a chance to prove himself. It's just that by that time, it's unclear whether the prince can really tell Fan Kinjao what he can do. Here comes someone, Bailey Rongs suddenly called out. Soon, a spy entered the door silently. Your Highness. Is there anything going on at the western suburbs mansion? Bailey Rongs asked. As far as I can tell you, Your Highness, the Zijiao mansion has been very quiet. Continue to send people to watch carefully. I want to know every move of everyone in the western suburbs mansion, especially Fan Kinjao. Yes. After the spies left, Bailey Rongs sat on the chair and did not move. Although he is fully confident that he will win this time, he must not take the precautions he needs to take lightly. Therefore, whether it is around the prince or around Fan Kinjao, he has already placed people in place. These people are all masters he has trained in the dark for many years. The few people around Fan Kinjao will never find out. In fact, Bailey Rongs was right. Lanja and Ningtian did not discover the existence of those people. But that doesn't mean that Fan Kinjao really doesn't know anything about it. Some things can be known without looking, just by guessing. Bailey Rongs had to be extremely careful in his desperate attempt to force the palace. Fan Kinjao thought that Bailey Fengming should have noticed it a long time ago. I didn't tell her the truth because I was worried that she would be scared. But is Fan Kinjao really afraid? How can it be? They have all died once, so what else is there to be afraid of? Fan Kinjao did not tell Lanja and Ningtian what he was thinking. Anyway, those people hiding around the mansion in the western suburbs were just trying to find out the news. As long as the Hua family was kept in the dark, those people would not take action. The more closely he was watched, the more calm Fan Kinjao became all day long. As if nothing had happened, he took Yuanyu to visit the various courtyards on weekdays. In his spare time, he would grind medicinal materials in the courtyard alone, pouring. It's really a rare pleasure. I happened to receive a message from Sun Kantong that day. Fan Kinjao simply packed up and got on the carriage. By the time she arrived at the tea house and opened the door to the private room, Sun Kongtong and Han Jingchen had already arrived. They didn't know what they were talking about, and their faces were a little unhappy. Why are you the latest to come today? Sun Kongtong saw Fan Kinjao coming in, and stood up with a smile, but the smile on his face was a bit far-fetched. Is it possible that I have been lazy during the Chinese New Year? Han Jingchen was also smiling. Compared with Sun Kongtong, the smile on her face was not much better. Fan Qinjiao untied his cloak and hung it on a shelf nearby. He looked at Sun Kentong and said, "You have gained a lot of weight during this period, and your complexion is better than before." Sun Kongtong took Fan Qinjiao and sat down and said, "My family is not as powerful as yours, but fortunately, I am down to earth and don't need to worry about anything. Yesterday, I went back to the Sun Mansion. My father and my mother's body is also quite good. In short, she has a big heart and a fat body." Fan Qinjiao nodded and looked at Han Jingchen aside. "How are you and the sixth prince doing lately?" Han Jingchen said, "It's good, but I'm very busy." Fortunately, the sixth prince still has an errand. No matter how powerful he is always busy. Since Bailey Rongs can send people to keep an eye on her and Bailey Fengming, he can keep an eye on everyone's actions. She can understand such a simple truth, it is impossible for Bailey Fengming to not think of it. So let alone the sixth prince, even King Pinglai and others were completely unaware of Bailey Rong's attempt to force the palace. Hearing this, Fan Qinjiao nodded and said, "When I just entered the door, I saw that you two looked bad. Since it is not your own business, it can only be my business." Han Jingchen. Is it really that obvious? Sun Kentong. She felt that she was pretending to be quite the same. Both Han Jingchen and Sun Kentong thought that Fan Qinjiao was chatting about family matters just now. How could they know that he was inquiring? Now facing Fan Qinjiao's inquiry, Han Jingchen and Sun Kongtong looked at each other, knowing that with their IQs they couldn't hide it, so they could only say cautiously, "Qinjiao, we can tell you, but this time you just have to hold on." End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1083. Chapter 1083, Adding Salt to the Wound. Fan Qinjiao looked at the two pairs of eyes in front of him that were filled with deep worry, but his heart was warmer. He smiled and said, "When did I become so weak in your hearts?" Han Jingchen and Sun Kentong looked at each other again and felt that what they said seemed reasonable. Others would either die or sway when encountering some wind and waves, but no matter how big the wind and waves were, as long as they hit Fan Qinjiao's face, Fan Qinjiao would not even sway, as if he hadn't even blinked. But when the words came to her lips, Sun Kongtong said that she was not worried about Fan Qinjiao's lies. He held her hand first, and then tried to keep his voice as low as possible and said, "The prince seems to be taking a concubine. Can you handle this?" "No." Fan Qinjiao was stunned for a moment. She had indeed never heard of this. Han Jingchen looked at Fan Qinjiao's expression and said, "I also heard what the person in our family said, but you also know that the person in our family has always been out of tune. Maybe it's just spreading rumors." Of course Fan Qinjiao knew that the sixth prince would never talk about this kind of thing casually. He looked at Han Jingchen and asked, "What specifically did the sixth prince tell you?" He didn't explain the specific details. He just said that today he heard that many ministers submitted the list of unmarried people in their own houses to the Ministry of Internal Affairs. People from the Ministry of Internal Affairs said that they seemed to be sent to the East Palace. Han Jingchen, I didn't dare to be sloppy, so I said it in detail. Sun Kongtong said curiously, "We haven't even got married yet in Qinjiao, but those people are thinking about going to the East Palace to take advantage first. Really seeing that the prince is in power now, they are eager to take off their clothes and stick them up. It's really ugly to be popular." Han Jingchen. Ahem, the words are rough but the reasoning is not rough. Normally speaking, Qinjiao has not yet married, so the prince should not have a concubine, but we in Ziliang do not have concubines who come in before our wives. Han Jingchen sighed. Among the successive princes and princes, there are many who first took concubines and then married wives. It is precisely because those people have learned this lesson that they are ready to take action now. Hearing this, Fan Qinjiao knew that this matter was probably true. He must have known about it, but he kept it secret because he was afraid that she would be sad. But now Fan Qinjiao has no time to feel sad about the spring and autumn. She thinks this matter is too strange. Her wedding to Bailey Fengming has been postponed to this day. It did not happen overnight. If the ministers in the court were really serious about it, why did they wait until now? Han Jingchen and Sun Kongtong saw that Fan Qinjiao was still reluctant to speak, so they thought she was heartbroken. They quickly held her hands, and Sun Kongtong said worriedly, "Qinjiao, are you okay?" Han Jingchen was also racking her brains to think of all kinds of words of comfort. There are no men in Ziliang who don't take concubines. I think the rich children all have wives and concubines, let alone the sons and grandsons of the royal family. Doesn't our family also have an aunt in the house? Fan Qinjiao could see that they were really worried about her, so he didn't say what he was thinking. He stayed in the tea house for a while, said goodbye to them, got on the carriage and left. I just didn't expect that when the carriage stopped at the mansion in the western suburbs, Fan Qinjiao got off the carriage and saw Yan Qian waiting at the entrance of the mansion beside the queen. Seeing Fan Qinjiao, Yan Qian hurriedly came over to greet him and said, "The queen, please invite the crown princess to come into the palace for a chat." Fan Qinjiao thought that the queen sent someone here at this time, and it must be about Bailey Fengming's acceptance of the concubine. He nodded and said, "Excuse me, eunuch Yan Qian, I will enter the palace right away." As Fan Qinjiao spoke, he was about to walk in the direction of his carriage. Yan Qian quickly stopped him and said with a smile, "The queen specially asked the servants to prepare a carriage for the crown princess." "Princess, please." Fan Qinjiao was stunned. He looked at the carriage behind Yan Qian, feeling warm in his heart. Even Han Jingchen knew that Bailey Fengming was going to take a concubine. "I am afraid that this matter has already spread in the main city. The Queen Mother treated her so kindly and valued her at this time, maybe she was showing it to everyone. No matter how many people were around the prince, she, Fan Qinjiao, would always be the one the Queen Mother held in her palms and cherished." Fan Qinjiao got on the carriage and came all the way to the palace gate. After getting off the carriage, Yan Qian quickly reached out to help him, while Fan Qinjiao smiled and said, "Thank you, eunuch Yan Qian." "The crown princess doesn't need to be so polite as a slave." Yan Qian looked at the smile on Fan Qinjiao's face, feeling really impressed and distressed at the same time. Although Ziliang is accustomed to having 3 wives and 4 concubines, which woman is really willing to live with someone else? Nowadays, the news about the crown prince's concubine is spreading. If the other women are either crying or making trouble, look at the person in front of him. His face is calm and composed, with a smile on his lips. This kind of grandeur and calmness is something that not everyone has. Fan Qinjiao followed Yan Qian into the palace and walked towards Fenji Palace. However, before he had walked a few steps, he saw several figures approaching from a distance. Fan Qinjiao took advantage of the situation and stopped. "What's the matter with the crown princess?" Yan Qian quickly stopped and asked, but when he followed Fan Qinjiao's gaze and looked forward, the smile on his face really couldn't hold on. It was none other than Yunyu who came slowly with the palace maid. "Yan Qian has a headache, this is really an idea. I thought it looked so familiar, so it's the crown princess who has entered the palace," Yunyu Edang said first. She seemed to be in a good mood, and even the smile on her face was extremely bright. "Princess Yunyu." Fan Qinjiao nodded as a greeting. Yunyu came over and took Fan Qinjiao's arm. The look was really intimate, but the words he said were worth recalling, speaking of which, the prince's concubines are really good. "I see. Their appearance is still a sign, and they are all well educated." Yan Qian was stunned. Is this what he should say now? This is obviously just rubbing salt into other people's wounds. However, Yunyu didn't seem to realize what she said wrongly, and continued to smile and said, I was just thinking about reporting to the Queen Mother, but I didn't expect that I met the Crown Princess. I think the Crown Princess also went to visit the Queen Mother, so why don't we go together? Fan Kinjao looked at Yunyu's proud expression, and finally found the answer to something he had been unable to figure out. The Imperial Palace in Ziliang is not small. How can it be so easy to meet someone in the palace? Furthermore, how could the Ministry of Internal Affairs choose a concubine for the Crown Prince, so how could it be given to Yunyu? No matter how curious Yunyu was, she couldn't spare the dignity to go to the Ministry of Internal Affairs to watch the excitement. Fan Kinjao thought about what Bailey Rong said when he left the palace in Yuanyu. What else could he not understand? This time the person who persuaded the courtiers to encourage Bailey Fengming to take a concubine was Bailey Rongs. And the reason why Yuanyu is standing here now is just to watch her laugh. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1084. Chapter 1084 I won't give you this face anymore. The reason why Yunyu is standing here now is naturally to watch Fan Kinjao lively. Ever since she was little, Yunyu's intelligence has always been one of the best in the palace. Otherwise, how would she have been able to help concubine Yu go to the Empress to find out information, and how could she have been able to sow discord in front of the Emperor, making the Emperor more and more dissatisfied with the prince? Indifferent. But since the arrival of Fan Kinjao, things in the palace have changed. Yunyu naturally couldn't swallow this breath, but whether she was competing with Fan Kinjao for scheming or medical skills, she could never defeat Fan Kinjao. Now that Fan Kinjao was finally trampled under his feet, Yunyu was in a much happier mood. If Princess Yunyu really wants to visit Queen Mother, she can go any day, so why rush for this moment? Furthermore, Queen Mother only sent someone to send me a message, but did not call Princess Yunyu. I want to come to Yunyu. It is inconvenient for Princess Yu to go with me now. Fan Kinjao still kept smiling, but this smile was much more dazzling when it fell on Yunyu. Yan Qian. This princess is so brave to say it. Hearing this, Yan Qian really didn't know how to smooth things over, so he could only stand aside as a wooden stake. Princess Yunyu frowned, and the smile on her face obviously disappeared. Is the crown princess saying that my mother dislikes me, or that I am not filial enough to my mother? Fan Kinjao was still smiling. Princess Yunyu is so smart, why do I need to say more? Fan Kinjao has never liked Princess Yunyu from the beginning, but at that time Princess Yunyu was good at disguising and was hypocritical all day long. Fan Kinjao was really unwilling to waste his energy to tear her face apart. But now that Yunyu comes to her openly and laughs, why does Fan Kinjao still spoil her? I really thought Fan Kinjao was afraid of her Yunyu. I just said that it is not convenient for Princess Yunyu to go to Fenji Palace now. Princess Yunyu thought of these reasons. Princess Yunyu is indeed as smart as the rumors. Fan Kinjao looked at Yunyu and smiled. Such a casual tone, as if you were sending away a beggar. Yunyu. Fan Kinjao is still going to beat him up? Yunyu was really angry, and even her heart was pounding. Why does the crown princess have to be so aggressive? Some things are already a foregone conclusion once they have happened. The crown princess still has to accept it with peace of mind. Princess Yunyu and I are both women. The path I am taking now is something that Princess Yunyu would never have taken without trying it. But seeing how broad-minded Princess Yunyu is, I feel relieved. Fan Kinjao was not worried. She replied calmly, and she had never lost when it came to insulting others. Since he could not get away from Bailey Rongs to persuade the Ministry of Internal Affairs to accept a concubine for the Crown Prince, naturally he could not get away from Yunyu. Fan Kinjao was never one to talk casually. She actually had a plan in her heart. However, Yunyu certainly didn't believe that Fan Kinjao had such ability and only thought that Fan Kinjao was cursing her. The crown princess is still as sharp-tongued as before. Yunyu gritted her teeth and smiled. Fan Kinjao was also smiling. It's really an honor for me to be so praised by Princess Yunyu, but there are some things that I don't just talk about. Yunyu. I have to go to see my mother, so I won't talk to Princess Yunyu anymore. Fan Kinjao nodded slightly, and then continued walking towards Fenji Palace with Yan Qian. Yunyu looked at Fan Kinjao's leaving figure and stood there for a long time without breathing. Originally, I was full of interest to watch the fun, but ended up getting angry. But no matter how arrogant Fan Kinjao was, why didn't he just watch the prince accept his concubine? The crown princess is too arrogant, said the palace maid following Yunyu. Yunyu took a breath and then said, only my father can make the final decision on my marriage. A little princess can only speak nonsense in front of me. Is there anything going on at the Ministry of Internal Affairs? Yunyu looked at the palace maid behind her and asked. The palace maid quickly lowered her head and replied, to return to the princess, I heard that everyone has been taken to the Ministry of Internal Affairs. I think there will be some movement soon. Yunyu nodded, and then looked in the direction of Fenji Palace. When everyone is sent to the East Palace, I want to see what Fan Kinjao still has to say. Fan Kinjao followed Yan Qian to Fenji Palace. Queen Zhengzi felt her heart tightening when she saw Fan Kinjao's calm and composed look. Are you still thinking about the overall situation, or are you suppressing your own thoughts? But no matter which one it is enough to make people feel distressed. Daughter-in-law, please give your regards to your mother. Fan Kinjao walked up to the Empress and greeted her in a polite manner. Empress Zhen 11 held her hand distressedly, pulled her to sit next to her, and said, now that the Emperor has no intention to deal with the government affairs, all kinds of monsters and ghosts dare to reach out to cause trouble, so it's difficult for you to carry it with all this. Hearing this, Fan Kinjao asked, didn't the Ministry of Internal Affairs obtain the Queen Mother's consent? Empress Zhen 11 snorted coldly, the Ministry of Internal Affairs gave the Crown Prince a concubine under the guise of being a royal heir. It was based on royal considerations, and that was political affairs. There is no need to report anything to the palace. Fan Kinjao really didn't expect that Bailey Rongs could do things so brilliantly and directly exclude the Queen. It seems that Bailey Rongs was the one who tried to insert people into Bailey Fengming's side this time. It is inevitable. Nowadays, both the court and the palace are in chaos. It's really hard for me to intervene in the prince's concubinage. The more leaderless the group is, the more everyone is ready to take action. Since concubine Yu dared to collude with Bailey Rongs and spread the news, she was not afraid that the Queen would dare to interfere. Once the Queen really intervenes in the affairs of the government, concubine Yu will naturally have a problem with her. The daughter-in-law knows the mother's painstaking efforts. The daughter-in-law has already made plans for this matter. Does the mother still remember what her daughter-in-law said when she was in the palace? Fan Kinjao looked at the Queen and said, with the Queen's help all the way, it saved her a lot of energy, but she couldn't rely on the Queen for everything. Queen Zhen 11 was stunned when she heard this. You mean? Fan Kinjao nodded and said, at that time, we just made a beginning and put it on hold. But as long as people haven't left, we still have a chance of winning this matter. No matter what, you can't let concubine Yu have to do everything. In the palace, the two of them were talking when they saw Lily running in a hurry, bending her knees to say hello, and then said, Empress, there has just been news that the Ministry of Internal Affairs has the beautiful women on the list were brought to the East Palace. Queen Zhen 11's heart skipped a beat. What is the purpose of taking people to the East Palace at this time? They are clearly forcing the prince to let his concubine in. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1085. Chapter 1085, Throw it out directly. Queen, this is what I have just found out. They are all beautiful girls who are going to be sent to the East Palace, Lily said, handing over the list in her hand. Queen Zhen 11 took a look at the list and frowned. The beautiful ladies here are all the daughters of neutral ministers. At present, the court is in turmoil. Bailey Fengming can handle the affairs of the court on behalf of the emperor. It can be said that the ministers in the court are pushing the boat along, and it can also be said that the ministers in the court are helping. If Bailey Fengming really drives out all those beautiful ladies today, he will naturally slap those courtiers in the face. In this case, how can those courtiers who were slapped in the face continue to support the prince? The other ministers will also feel disheartened when they see this. Fan Qinjiao looked at the list in the queen's hand and felt sick. By doing this, Bailey Rongs was clearly forcing Bailey Fengming to make a choice, either to protect her and abandon those ministers, or to abandon those ministers to protect her. Such an act of cutting off an arm, no matter whether it is left or right, will make Bailey Fengming's blood splatter. At this time, the East Palace was experiencing a storm. The East Palace, which had always been neglected before, suddenly had an influx of 7 or 8 young and beautiful women. This scene was really weird no matter how you looked at it. Xiaoxian and Lin Yi had indeed heard that the Ministry of Internal Affairs had recruited several women early in the morning, but when they saw the familiar faces, their hearts suffocated. Although these faces look different, if you look carefully, each face has some similarities with the princess. What is this going to do? It is clear that he wants to seduce the prince openly and secretly. Just by looking at these faces, Xiaoxian and Lin Yi could imagine the sinister intentions of the people behind them. Just as Xiaoxian and Lin Yi were thinking about how to find an excuse to let the people from the Ministry of Internal Affairs return home, one of the women took the initiative to come up. Feng Siyuan relied on the fact that his father was the new prime minister, so naturally he would not pay attention to the two servants, Xiaoxian and Lin Yi. When he saw the prince playing chess in the palace, he walked to the door and bowed. Yingying, my maid, Feng Siyuan, has met His Highness the Crown Prince. It was while Bailey Fengming was playing chess that he heard the sound. When he saw Feng Siyuan's face, his dark eyes paused. His features and eyes were indeed very similar to Ayao's. It was hard to appreciate the good intentions of those people. Feng Siyuan looked at the prince and looked over, his cheeks turned red, and he murmured shyly, I have heard of the reputation of His Highness the Prince a long time ago, and this time he enters the palace. Click. A crisp sound directly interrupted Feng Siyuan's words. The teacup that was originally placed on Bailey Fengming's table was broken at Feng Siyuan's feet. Feng Siyuan specially wore a white skirt and white clothes today, which means pure and flawless. But now the spotless skirt is covered with tea stains and a few tea leaves, which looks both abrupt and ridiculous. Before I entered the palace, my father had been telling me to serve His Highness the Crown Prince well. I must be standing here with a sincere heart, but what does His Highness mean by being like this now? Feng Siyuan said. His father was the prime minister of the dynasty, so he spoke with confidence. Using his father as a shield, Feng Cheng is really a good tutor. Bailey Fengming couldn't hear what Feng Siyuan said, and even revealed Feng Siyuan's little thoughts on the spot. Feng Siyuan's throat was choked. She was obviously angry, but she was not angry. Instead, her palm-sized face was filled with deep grievance and pity, especially those eyes that looked very much like Fan Qinjiao. A layer of tears. Seeing this, Bailey Fengming raised his lips and said, Did you enter the palace just to stand in my courtyard and cry? Feng Siyuan suddenly froze on the spot. The purpose of her entering the palace was naturally not to stand here and cry. Her father told her that the prince now holds great power and is no longer the bald prince before. If she can really be favored by the prince and become his concubine, her future glory and wealth will be endless. Feng Siyuan was still a little hesitant when she entered the palace. After all, even though the prince had never been married, he already had a princess in name. She was not willing to be the younger one, but when she saw the prince's face, All her hesitations disappeared in an instant. It all came to nothing. She has always known that the prince is a weak and incompetent prince, but she has never known that the prince is so handsome and eye-catching. Your Highness, my maid. Feng Siyuan looked at that face and boldly took a step forward, holding up her skirt to cross the threshold in front of her. Bailey Fengming did not stop Feng Siyuan, but shouted toward the outside of the courtyard, Lin Yi. Seeing this, Feng Siyuan felt secretly happy, but just when she thought she finally had a chance to get close to the prince, she heard Bailey Fengming say to Lin Yi, who was walking to the door, "Throw the person out." Feng Siyuan. After receiving the order, Lin Yi did not dare to slack off. He grabbed Feng Siyuan by the back collar and let Feng Siyuan scream in fear. He threw her into the yard with a wave of her hand. It's really just throwing it away. When the other beautiful ladies in the yard saw this, their faces turned pale. How could they dare to raise their heads? Feng Siyuan was half lying on the ground, trembling with shock and humiliation. She had grown up being held in the palm of someone's hand. When had she ever experienced such humiliation and grievance? But she definitely didn't dare to question the prince. She raised her head and looked at the people from the Ministry of Internal Affairs. What are you doing? Did I enter the palace just to stand aside and watch the jokes? The people from the Ministry of Internal Affairs looked embarrassed. If the prince really drove people away, they would naturally have reasons to stop and dissuade him. But now His Highness the Prince just threw the person out of the yard and said nothing more. Even if they wanted to speak, they couldn't find a reason. The other beautiful ladies standing in the courtyard quietly watched the prince, who was playing chess by himself again. It was false to say that he did not yearn for his superior status and that handsome face, but they looked at the prince, who was still slumped on the ground. Feng Siyuan, who dares to take another step forward? Just when everyone was at a stalemate, Yunyu stepped in. Yunyu looked at Feng Siyuan, who was still kneeling on the ground, frowned and angrily scolded the people in the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Are you all dead? Those who can stand here are all qualified to be the crown prince's concubine. How can you ignore it? Did you get up? Princess Yunyu, please forgive me. The people from the Ministry of Internal Affairs quickly helped concubine Feng Siyuan up. Yunyu looked at Feng Siyuan and said, since you are the daughter of the Prime Minister, you should look like the daughter of the Prime Minister. If you are so unable to withstand the wind and rain, how will you stand by the prince's side in the future? Feng Siyuan's eyes flashed with surprise, and she quickly said, my dear, thank you Princess Yunyu for your teaching. Lin Yi and Xiaoxian on the side frowned when they heard this. What is Princess Yunyu going to do? If this word really spreads, wouldn't everyone want to regard Feng Siyuan as the crown prince's concubine? If you really wait until that time, how can His Highness the Prince make it clear? End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1086. Chapter 1086. You have to find someone to put out the fire. Yunyu didn't care about the expressions of Lin Yi and Xiaoxian. She just said that on purpose. If the prince really didn't want to accept the concubine, then she would find a way to force the prince to nod. Otherwise, why would she be here now? Stepping through the door, Yunyu sat across from Bailey Fengming and said with a smile, our royal family has always focused on the reproduction of heirs. If the father knew that the prince had adopted a concubine, he would definitely be gratified and happy. This is really like moving out of the emperor right after he came up. Bailey Fengming said calmly, if Princess Yunyu really cares about her father, she should visit the emperor more often. Yunyu frowned, the prince is mocking me, isn't he? Bailey Fengming curled his lips and showed a faint smile, it was just a casual comment. Why is Princess Yunyu still angry? Yunyu suppressed the anger in her heart and said with a serious tone, "You have just held the power now, and you won't be able to stand without some people to help you. The people in the Ministry of Internal Affairs are also doing it for your own good. Although you and the Crown Princess are still in trouble, it's a bit unethical to bring in a concubine before she's even married, but I think the Crown Princess can be forgiven for it because of her reasonableness. The people in the Ministry of Internal Affairs are really careful, otherwise they wouldn't have found so many women with similar faces," Bailey Fengming said, then looked at Yunyu and said, "I really didn't know the people in this main city before. The women all look so similar." Yunyu felt guilty for a moment, but she quickly smiled and said, "No matter how similar they are, I think they are different in their own way. These women all look like Fan Kinjao, so it cannot be an accident." Yunyu had sent people to their mansion before, delivered them a potion, and told them that if they wanted to be favored by the prince, they should use this potion to paint their eyebrows according to the prince's face. Although this potion can be restored to its original state after just washing, it is enough to make the prince nod and make Fan Kinjao upset. "Father is not in good health right now. If I have you to cheer me up, maybe I can really recover." Yunyu spent so much effort to make these faces that resembled Fan Kinjao just so that Bailey Fengming couldn't refuse. Since Fan Kinjao was the crown prince designated by the emperor, now that Bailey Fengming does not accept women who are similar to Fan Kinjao, she is disobeying the holy emperor and treason. "How can I decide whether my father will recover or not?" Bailey Fengming said with a smile. Yunyu was stunned. "What did you say?" "Princess Yunyu should know very well what I said." Bailey Fengming smiled leisurely, and her black eyes shone brightly in the sunlight in the yard, but the depths of her eyes were so cold that it made people feel chilling. There was not the slightest bit of warmth to be found. Yunyu looked at Bailey Fengming like this, and her palms were sweating. Of course she didn't believe that Bailey Fengming knew anything, but if he really didn't know, why did he say what he just said? Talk. And if it is Bailey Fengming's true love, how much do you know? At this moment, Yunyu, who had always been eloquent, became mute because she did not dare to speak again for fear of being noticed by the prince again. "I came here with good intentions to persuade the prince. I hope the prince will not insist on his own way." Yunyu really couldn't sit down anymore, so she got up and walked out in a hurry. While passing by Feng Siyuan, Yunyu paused and whispered, "I've done everything I can to help you. As for whether you can stay or not, it's up to you." Feng Siyuan nodded quickly. Lin Yi and Xiaoxian didn't know what Princess Yunyu said to their highness. Now seeing Princess Yunyu leaving in a hurry, they were naturally panicked. Princess Yunyu is the best at fanning the flames. If Princess Yunyu is allowed to go out and talk nonsense. No, you have to find someone to put out the fire. Lin Yi and Xiaoxian looked at each other silently, tacitly thinking of the same person. Princess. Over at Fenji Palace, Fan Kinjao and the Queen were still discussing matters when they saw Lin Yi rushing over and telling them everything that had just happened in the East Palace. Empress Zhen 11 and Fan Kinjao were both stunned after hearing this. Fan Kinjao knew that Bailey Fengming and Bailey Rongs were different, and they were definitely not the kind of rats who had different ideas, but he never expected that Bailey Fengming would really abandon him. Princess, please go over and have a look. Lin Yi stood in the Queen's chamber. The 7-foot-tall man was so anxious that he almost cried. He was really worried about Bailey Fengming. Of course Fan Kinjao couldn't let Yunyu go out and make up random things. He stood up and knelt down to the Empress, and then he left Fenji Palace with Lin Yi with his skirt in hand. We came all the way to the East Palace. As soon as we entered the door, we saw a figure rushing towards us. Fan Kinjao lowered his eyes slightly, and saw Feng Siyuan crying with a grieved face, "My daughter pays homage to the Crown Princess. I have long heard about the reputation of the Crown Princess, and even admires the Crown Princess's intelligence. This time my daughter enters the palace. I really want to help the Crown Princess serve His Highness, and I hope that the Crown Princess can help my daughter." Fan Qinjiao looked at Feng Siyuan's face and was stunned. She did know that there was a potion that could change a person's facial features, but not only was the potion not permanent, the medicinal materials required were hard to find. With such a disgusting plan, Bailey Rongs would naturally not have thought of it, so only Yunyu was left. Yunyu really took great pains to respond to her. I didn't know that I had so many advantages. Since you said so, why not tell me what makes me famous and smart? Fan Qinjiao looked at Feng Siyuan and said. Feng Siyuan never expected that Fan Qinjiao would ask back, and she was immediately stuck. Lin Yi almost laughed out loud when he saw this. He slapped the horse's hoof with his flattery and asked you if it hurt. Fan Qinjiao paused and then said, I heard that Miss Feng is also from a famous family. In this case, you should think twice before speaking. Today is just embarrassing in front of me. If you really make trouble in front of other people in the future, that's ridiculous. It was deathly silent in the yard. I have long heard that the crown princess is as articulate as a knife, but now I see that her reputation is indeed well deserved. It's not like those showgirls have never argued with others, but they basically just exchanged words with each other and it was over. They had never seen such a suffocating person like the crown princess. She didn't have any kindness at all. Don't even talk about it. Feng Siyuan was stunned on the spot, obviously not knowing what to say. Help the person, after all, he is the daughter of the prime minister's family. If he bumps into someone in the palace, the prince will not say it and you will not be able to bear it. Fan Qinjiao's words tied the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the East Palace together. Superior. As a result, the people from the Ministry of Internal Affairs naturally supported Feng Siyuan tightly and did not allow her to move at all. Otherwise, if something really happened, they would be the first ones that Prime Minister Feng would not let go of. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1087. Chapter 1087. A thunder exploded on the ground. Just when Feng Siyuan was watched unable to move by the Ministry of Internal Affairs, Fan Qinjiao stepped into the palace. Bailey Fengming followed the sound and when he saw it was Fan Qinjiao, he stood up and walked over. Why are you here? Fan Qinjiao smiled and said, I heard that there is a lot of excitement here, so I came over to join in the fun. Bailey Fengming's unattractive face forced out a smile. I've made you laugh. Fan Qinjiao raised his eyebrows. I heard that you threw the others out, but why do you look so ugly? Bailey Fengming took her hand and asked her to sit on the chair opposite. Looking at her fair face, he stretched out his hand and caressed it gently, as if caring for a treasure. I don't want to let you down. Fan Qinjiao was stunned, and suddenly remembered what he had said to her a few days ago. He said, Ayao, believe me. At that time, Fan Qinjiao just heard that, but he didn't expect that he would always fulfill his promise. I have always believed in you. Fan Qinjiao looked at him and said without any hesitation. Bailey Fengming's eyes froze for a moment, and then the corners of his lips returned to their usual smile. How about a game of chess? Fan Qinjiao. There are still a group of people listening to the wall standing in the yard. It's hard for you to still have this thought. Bailey Fengming picked up the white pieces from the chessboard and handed it over. Fan Qinjiao took the chess box and said, you are so unwilling to give Prime Minister Feng face, are you afraid that he will wear small shoes for you afterwards? After all, Prime Minister Feng was not the only one offended by Bailey Fengming. Among the fathers of the beautiful girls in the courtyard, which one is not the minister of the court? This is also one of Yunyu and Bailey Rong's plans. Bailey Fengming smiled slightly. You and the Queen Mother have paved the way for me, so what do I have to worry about? Fan Qinjiao was startled. You mean? Bailey Fengming nodded and said, originally I was still looking for some kind of opportunity, but now it seems like it's just right. I can't let you and the Queen be busy in vain while in the palace. Fan Qinjiao came here just to discuss the matter with Bailey Fengming. Unexpectedly, Bailey Fengming had already thought about everything in advance, which saved her the fatigue of having a dry mouth. The beautiful ladies who came with the Ministry of Internal Affairs were still standing in the courtyard, just watching the prince and the princess play chess as if no one else was around. Looking at the attentive and gentle man, the beautiful ladies just felt that they had just turned a blind eye to them. It's two people. Otherwise, why are they so different? As people in the courtyard were watching eagerly, they saw the prince calling Lin Yi and Xiaoxian into the palace together, and immediately after the two came out, he kicked them all away. That's right. That's really all. The kind that leaves no one behind. For a time, all the beautiful ladies came out of the East Palace in great force. The ministers who sent their daughter to the East Palace this time would be lying if they said there was no coercion. Now that the prince only holds power temporarily, they naturally bet that the prince will not offend them, so they dare to force their daughter into it. But while these people were still dreaming about their daughters becoming the crown prince's concubines in the mansion, they saw their daughters entering the house one by one with disgraced faces. The ministers who were still dreaming just now, what a slap in the face. Concubine, you did not expect that the prince would dare to be so ruthless. She did not keep any concubines. She called Yunyu and Bailey Rongs to discuss the matter that night. After all, no one thought that the prince would really dare. I didn't expect that the prince, who has always been weak, would have such backbone, but I underestimated him. Bailey Rongs was not in a good mood. After all, the more the prince paid attention to Fan Qingjao, the more panicked he became. I didn't expect that the prince could really do this for the princess. The smile on Yunyu's face was a bit far-fetched. Although it seems that they have achieved their goal from now on, for Fan Qingjao, he has obtained this. Something that every woman in the world dreams of. Even Yunyu herself doesn't know whether her future husband will stick to her forever. At this moment, Yunyu envied Fan Qingjao. Even if she doesn't want to admit it at all. As expected of being raised by the queen, both mother and son are so stupid. Concubine, you sneered. In this harem, if we say who has the deepest affection for the emperor, it is naturally the queen. The queen is different from the rest of them. She followed the emperor when he was still a bald prince. But what will happen in the end? Will she be replaced by other young and beautiful concubines in the palace? In the face of reality, how much is deep love worth? My son has sent people to spread the news about how Xiaonu was neglected in the East Palace. I'm afraid it won't be long before those courtiers can't sit still, Bailey Rongs said, with a hint of viciousness in his eyes. Yunyu looked at Bailey Rongs and said, it's best to let those who convey the message make the matter more serious. The more wrong the beautiful ladies are in the East Palace, the more the courtiers will be unable to sit still. What will those courtiers do when they learn that their daughter has been wronged? Naturally, he went to the palace to meet the prince as soon as possible. But if there is a real gap between these ministers and the prince, how can the prince hold on to the power in his hands? This one, whether it is Bailey Rongs or Yunyu, naturally does not want Fan Qingjao and the prince to end well. Empress, Empress. Several people in the bedroom were talking when they saw Nanny Zhang running in with an anxious look on her face. She was so hasty that she even forgot to say hello. What's all the fuss about? Concubine, you frowned. Grandma Zhang glanced at Princess Yunyu and then said tremblingly, news just came that we, Ziliang, have decided to marry Donglin. After hearing this, Concubine Yu said nonchalantly, the marriage between Ziliang and Donglin didn't happen in a day or two. Anyway, there are so many princesses in Ziliang, and I just married one at random. Aunt Zhang lowered her head after hearing this, her hands were wrung together nervously, and it took a long time before she mustered up the courage to speak, but, I heard that the old slave was sent to the Donglin kingdom for marriage this time. Yes, it's Princess Yunyu. The smile on Concubine Yu's face disappeared instantly, and she stood up in surprise. What did you say? This old slave heard this news from the emperor. It seems to be that Tianqi, the master of Yaeshi Pavilion, is suspected of deceiving the emperor. Now he has absconded from the palace and his whereabouts are unknown. The prince has sent people to check that Yaeshi Pavilion is a crooked cult and has sent troops. Go immediately to exterminate and seize. Nanijong bumped the list and looked at Yunyu and said, on the way back, I saw the 6th prince of Donglan Kingdom going to the East Palace, saying that he was discussing the marriage of Princess Yunyu with His Highness the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince thought that the 6th prince of Donglan Kingdom was going to the East Palace. The prince has a deep affection for Princess Yunyu, so he agreed to the marriage. A thunder exploded on the ground. It directly fried the mother and daughter of Yu Palace until they were charred on the outside and tender on the inside. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1088. Chapter 1088 Reasons for not being able to refuse. After the fall of the Taoist temple, Bailey Rongs naturally wanted to take out Tang Juwei immediately. It was Tang Juwei's secret help that allowed Bailey Rongs to recruit troops so smoothly. I thought that as long as the court couldn't catch Tang Juwei, there would be nothing we could do, but how could we have imagined that the prince would overturn the entire medicine master pavilion with a single blow? The thing that made Bailey Rongs vomit blood the most was that he knew where Tang Juwei was, but he couldn't release Tang Juwei at this time, otherwise it would be a clear way for the court to arrest Tang Juwei. Yunyu saw Bailey Rongs sitting silently aside, and knew that there was no way Bailey Rongs would let the master show up for her, thus ruining the entire plan. So, she doesn't even have the only way out. Yunyu really hated the 6th prince of Donglan Kingdom. She was so angry that she fainted on the spot. Concubine Yu is indeed partial to her son, but she cannot just watch her daughter being sent away to be wronged. She looked at Bailey Rongs and said, the emperor is just seriously ill and not an old fool. Please hurry up and beg the emperor. Concubine Yu has been favored by the emperor since she entered the palace. At this time, the only thing she can think of is the emperor. Bailey Rongs also knew that the only one who could stop the marriage now was his father, so he hurriedly went to the imperial palace. Unexpectedly, he met the prince as soon as he entered the courtyard. How come Brother Three Emperors is in such a hurry? Bailey Fengming asked proactively. Like the prince, he was worried about his father's health, so he came over to take a look. Bailey Rongs didn't expect to meet Bailey Fengming here. No matter how anxious he was, he had to suppress it now. Bailey Fengming smiled and said, if that's the case, the 3rd Emperor brother came at the right time. I originally planned to send someone to invite the 3rd Emperor brother to come to the East Palace to discuss the marriage of Princess Yunyu. Bailey Rongs looked at the gentle smile on Bailey Fengming's face. It was exactly the same as the weak and incompetent look in his memory, but it was obviously the same face and the same expression, but now the words he spoke were far away. Deadlier than ever. Does the prince really not know that Yunyu does not want to marry Donglan? Bailey Rongs naturally didn't believe it. It's not too late to discuss the royal sister's marriage later. In my opinion, no matter what it is, it can't be compared with visiting my father. When Bailey Rongs thought that Bailey Fengming did all this deliberately, his expression naturally, I couldn't help but look ugly. Bailey Fengming didn't stop him when he heard it, Brother Three Emperors, please allow me. Bailey Rongs saw that Bailey Fengming had not gone far, as if he was waiting for him. He frowned but had no time to think about anything. He took a few steps forward and came to the door of the palace, and asked Bai Tu at the door to pass the message on his behalf. Bai Tu turned around and entered the dormitory. He stopped again when he was still some distance away from the inner bed. Through the bead curtain in front of him, he looked at the heavy bed curtain hanging to the floor on the bed in the inner bed and said, please tell me, Your Majesty, the 3rd prince is outside asking for an audience. On the bed, I was speechless for a long time. Bai Tu's words were as if they were lost in the ocean, without any response. I don't know how long it took before Emperor Yangchang's hoarse and dark voice, mixed with fits of coughing, came out, just now, the prince was talking about Yunyu's marriage, so let the third prince hurry up and discuss it with the prince. Shoot the person away directly, which means he has disappeared. Yes, Baitu retreated respectfully. Outside the door, Bailey Rongs was still waiting anxiously. When he saw Baitu coming out, he quickly stepped forward to go inside. After all, in his opinion, it was absolutely impossible for his father to miss him. Baitu quickly stretched out his hand to stop the person and said politely, "Your Highness, the Emperor just told you to go to the East Palace to discuss the marriage of Princess Yunyu with the Crown Prince." What did you say?" Bailey Rongs was so shocked that he looked towards the palace behind Baitu in disbelief. "Father, really don't want to see me." Baitu lowered his head. He said, "I dare not pretend to preach the holy will. Even the holy will has been brought out." Bailey Rongs' eyes were a bit blurred after being hit. Since childhood, Bailey Rongs has been living with a sense of superiority. No matter what he says or does, his father will always favor him, but now he is being ignored. This feeling really made him feel more shameless than being slapped in the face. Turning around, he saw the prince standing not far away looking at him with a smile. Bailey Rongs almost straightened his back and walked over. "The prince has been waiting here. I'm afraid he didn't know what to do with my father early in the morning. Will the Emperor see me?" A fallen leaf fell on the snow-white shoulder. Bailey Fengming stretched out his hand and gently swept the fallen leaf to the ground. Then he looked at Bailey Rongs and said, "Shiren, brother, 3 emperors said that everything must be done with the father in mind. The Emperor is the master, and this marriage of Princess Yunyu is just to bring joy to the Emperor, so naturally I cannot slack off." Bailey Rongs: "Now I finally know why my father didn't see him. He always thought that the prince made the decision to let Yunyu marry." Unexpectedly, the prince had already negotiated with the Emperor. Bailey Rongs has been secretly refining elixirs for the Emperor for so long. How could he not know that the Emperor is most greedy for life and afraid of death? Happiness. Facing such reasons, how could the Emperor refuse? Bailey Rongs looked at the palace behind him again. He didn't believe that his father would be completely unaware of his conversation with the prince, but his father still had no intention of seeing him. How come Bailey Rongs doesn't understand the meaning of this? "Let's go." Bailey Rongs looked at the prince and said, "What else can I do if I don't leave?" At present, he does not have the confidence to resist the imperial edict. Just when Bailey Rongs followed Bailey Fengming to the East Palace to discuss Yunyu's marriage, Yuyu Palace also received the news. Concubine Yu slumped down on the Arhat bed, her eyes red with shock. After a long while, she said to Nanny Zhang beside her, "I have always been the Emperor because I am ruthless to the Queen. I didn't expect that the Emperor is actually the same to everyone. Anyone who blocks the Emperor's interests will be dealt with by the Emperor without blinking an eye." This time, Concubine Yu finally tasted what it means to be ruthless as an emperor. Yunyu's marriage was very fast and urgent. By the next day, the Ministry of Internal Affairs had already started the process. At this time, the ministers who had originally planned to go to the palace to argue with the prince were confused. Who would have thought that the prince did not take a concubine, but Princess Yunyu got married instead? All the ministers who sent their daughters to the palace this time naturally felt like Ming Jing. The person who proposed this idea was the third prince. Although everyone had already guessed that the third prince's move was to cause a stumbling block for the prince. But who doesn't want to take the opportunity to make their daughter stand out? Now facing the marriage of Princess Yunyu, who is not panicking? I'm scared to death. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1089. Chapter 1089, Yunyu's marriage. Now this matter is clearly in front of you. As long as you are not blind, No one can see that the marriage of Princess Yunyu is clearly the result of the third prince and the prince losing in a duel. Even if the third prince loses, he has to send his own sister to marry. What a painful realization this is. As for the ministers who originally planned to go to the prince to argue, it's still a shame. The news of Princess Yunyu's marriage soon spread throughout the streets and alleys of the main city. In order to keep his ears clean, Bailey Rong simply closed the door in his mansion and thanked guests. Fan Kinjao was actually a little surprised when he heard the news. Originally, she wanted Yunyu to marry Donglin, so that she could scare the monkeys, but she didn't expect Bailey Fengming to move so quickly. On the second day after accepting the concubine, the sixth prince of Donglin Kingdom took the initiative to propose a marriage with Yunyu. No matter what methods and reasons Bailey Fengming used, it can't help but be amazing. What a vigorous and resolute person. Fan Kinjao was just thinking when he saw Ning'an hurriedly entered the door and said, "Miss, Princess Yunyu is here." Fan Kinjao frowned slightly. Yunyu had always been the one who would go to the Three Treasures Hall for everything, but now she took the initiative to come to the door. You can understand the reason after just a little thought. Invite people in. Fan Kinjao put down the medicinal materials he was sorting and said. Since people have blocked the door, there is no reason for her to disappear. Princess Yunyu came very quickly. As soon as she entered the door, she walked over and held Fan Kinjao's hand. Before she could say anything, tears fell first. Fan Kinjao pretended to be surprised and said, "What's wrong with Princess Yunyu?" Yunyu clenched Fan Kinjao's hand again, and then cried, "To be honest, Princess, I already have someone to belong to in my heart. I originally thought that before returning to Yaeshi Pavilion, I would ask my father and the emperor to the Queen Mother made the decision to betroth me to senior brother Yan, but she didn't expect." Yunyu said it sincerely, but Fan Kinjao didn't believe a word he said. How could a person like Yunyu, who has such a high level of vision, be willing to marry a small disciple of Medicine Master Pavilion? This matter is not something that can be said. It is reasonable for the prince not to know about it, but what has happened has happened. I am afraid that if I really marry and go to Donglin, I will have a lifelong affair. If word spreads, the prince will fall into unkindness. Fan Kinjao understood clearly that Yunyu came to the door today just to threaten. Whether Bailey Fengming is the current crown prince or the future emperor, it would be bad if he really bears the reputation of beating up his sister. After all, how can someone who is not nice to his own sister be trusted by others? Fan Kinjao thought. He was afraid that if she rejected Yunyu now, Yunyu would turn around and let the news out. By then, not only Bailey Fengming, but also she would become a cold, heartless, and despicable little person. People. Yunyu is indeed smart. Knowing that women tend to care more about their reputation than men, that's why they approached her. But Yunyu's calculation was wrong on one point. She, Fan Kinjao, was different from other women. I didn't expect Princess Yunyu to have such thoughts. Speaking of which, I should help persuade the prince. Fan Kinjao looked at Yunyu and said. Princess, please help me. Yunyu held Fan Kinjao's hand, lovingly refusing to let go, as if she was not the person who had been waiting to see Fan Kinjao's jokes in the palace a few days ago. But what to do? Fan Kinjao sighed, paused, and then said, if I remember correctly, Princess Yunyu's marriage to Donglin was to bring joy to the emperor. Although I understand Princess Yunyu's deep affection, I know even better. Princess Yunyu has always been filial. If the prince really vetoes the marriage with Donglin, some people may say that Princess Yunyu is unfilial. If there is such a rumor, I will personally explain it. Yunyu is naturally not afraid of any rumors. Bailey Rong's large army will arrive in the main city soon. When the palace is completely destroyed, her biological brother becomes the new god, who dares to say anything about her. Speaking of which, the marriage between Donglin and Ziliang has been delayed for a long time. Now Donglin finally nodded and agreed to give a generous gift to welcome Princess Yunyu. If the prince helps Princess Yunyu to renege on Donglin at this time, I'm afraid he will anger Donglin. That's right, no one can afford the consequences. Once the two countries go to war, the people will naturally suffer. So if Yunyu dares to release the news and slander Bailey Fengming for beating the Mandarin duck with a stick, she can also let the people of Ziliang know the consequences of Yunyu's refusal to marry and angering Donglin. By that time, does Yunyu really think that she can suppress the people of the world just by virtue of her status as a princess? It's just a dream. People are selfish when it comes to their own interests. I think the third prince and concubine Yu must have understood the reason why they chose to bear the pain and let Princess Yunyu get married. Even if Bailey Rongs and Yu Gaifei can't understand, it doesn't matter. Fan Qinjiao will naturally find a way to make them understand. It is true that concubine Yu feels sorry for Yunyu, but what she values more is Bailey Rong's future. If Yunyu really blocks Bailey Rong's path, it just depends on whether concubine Yu and Bailey Rongs abandon you or not. Every word Fan Qinjiao said pierced Yunyu's heart like a needle. By the time Fan Qinjiao finished speaking, Yunyu was already speechless. Because Yunyu knows better than anyone else the partiality of her mother and concubine and the selfishness of her younger brother. Yunyu, who almost returned in defeat, stood up and left with her heavy body. Every step she took was extremely painful and heavy. Fan Qinjiao looked at Yunyu's back, but couldn't feel any heartache or pity. Think about how Yunyu would have considered her feelings when he plotted against her. Furthermore, since Yunyu came back, she has helped Bailey Rongs do many harmful things, and now it can be considered that evil is rewarded. Since it was for the emperor, no one in the palace dared to delay Yunyu's marriage. After a rush of preparations and busy work, Yunyu finally set foot on the road to Donglin on the morning of the 6th day of the Lunar New Year. On the day of farewell, Yunyu cried several times and the makeup on her face was stained. In the end, she didn't even have the strength to stand, and she was almost carried into a carriage by the palace people. Concubine Yu stood at the entrance of the palace. In front of the queen, she would not show any pain, but no matter how calm she pretended to be, her pale face still betrayed her. On the night when Yunyu left the main city, Hua Yaoding also decided to get up and go to Huaishang. Late at night, Fan Qinjiao came to his grandfather's study. At this time, Hua Yaoding was already ready to go, and he looked heroic in his riding attire, but the gray on his temples was so obvious in the candle light. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1090. Chapter 1090. Farewell again. Tao Yuxian was packing his belongings. Although it was not too far from the main city to Huaishang and there was no need for a change of clothes, Tao Yuxian still picked out 1 or 2 clean clothes and packed them in the package. You just don't like to change your clothes, but whether you are fighting outside or doing anything else, you always have to change your clothes when they are dirty, otherwise the younger generation will laugh at you for being disheveled. Tao Yuxian said, and took out another bag of broken silver. It's always hard to get banknotes when you go out. I put these broken silver in for you, which is enough for you to pick up on the road. Also, you don't have a stomach. Well, even if you are on the road, you can't eat cold food often, you still have to take care of your health. Hua Yaoding stood aside, quietly watching the back of his wife packing the package for him. His eyes gradually became moist, and the tears that blurred his eyes wanted to escape from the frame several times, but he stopped him from going back. Tao Yuxian's voice continued, "You always complained to me that I didn't talk much when you went out. In fact, I didn't know what to say, because I know that my sons go out with you. I can rest assured. Every time I just want to feel at ease waiting at home, you will eventually come back." "Madam." Hua Yaoding wanted to say something, but he choked and trembled all over. After Tao Yuxian packed up the package, he turned around. He was already in tears, but when he looked at Hua Yaoding, he still showed a faint smile. "Master, Bring your sons back. They must miss home already. Hua Yaoding nodded seriously, I promise you. Fan Kinjao squeezed the handkerchief tightly, his heart aching like flesh. Such a farewell, perhaps a reunion. Perhaps it's goodbye forever. Why is our little Kinjao so silent today? Hua Yaoding looked at Fan Kinjao and said with a smile, still the majestic but loving smile in his memory. Fan Kinjao raised his head, looked at his grandfather and said, Grandpa, can I hug you? Hua Yaoding was stunned. He didn't expect that his grandson, who was tougher than a boy, also had such a soft side, but he still walked over with a smile, spread his arms and hugged Fan Kinjao in his arms. Why are you still so thin after being raised at home for so long? Don't think so much. You and Grandma will just wait in the main city and leave the outside matters to Grandma. Hua Yaoding was really distressed. Why is my granddaughter not gaining weight after living for so long? Fan Kinjao leaned into his grandfather's strong and generous embrace, but silently shed 2 lines of clear tears. Once upon a time, this scene seemed so familiar. At that time, she wanted to help Bailey Wrongs fight for the throne, and even forced her grandfather to lead troops to surround the palace. That time, her grandfather held her in his arms like he does now, and told her with a smile that she didn't want anything. Worry, just leave everything to my grandfather. Times passed, and the past and reality collided. Fan Kinjao was in so much pain that he could hardly breathe. Because it was that separation that became an eternal separation. After my grandfather helped Bailey Wrongs obtain the throne, he was charged with dozens of baseless crimes and sentenced to the death penalty of quartering his body with 5 horses. Even the last bones had to be thrown into the countryside to be eaten by wild dogs. Where was Fan Kinjao at that time? Even if Bailey Wrongs and Fan Swinning bullied him all day long, he still hoped that Bailey Wrongs could change his mind. She was really stupid when she thought about it at that time. But just being stupid once is enough. Grandpa, don't worry about fighting abroad. I will definitely take good care of everyone in the Hua family. Fan Kinjao slowly raised his head from his grandfather's arms, his dark eyes washed by tears were bright and firm. This time, she must advance and retreat with the Hua family. Okay. Hua Yaoding touched the top of Fan Kinjao's hair, smiled and nodded. If others said this, Hua Yaoding would naturally laugh it off, but since it was Xiao Kinjao who said it, he naturally believed that his Xiao Kinjao could do it. As long as his little Kinjao says it, he will believe it to the end and will never question it. Fan Kinjao and Tao Yuxian stood at the entrance of the tunnel, staring at Hua Yaoding's leaving figure. Even though the darkness in the tunnel had gradually swallowed Hua Yaoding's figure completely, they were reluctant to look away for a long time. You should go back to sleep after some time, Tao Yuxian finally said. Since everyone is gone, it will be useless no matter how reluctant they are to leave. Fan Kinjao calmed down, looked at his grandmother, smiled and said, Don't worry, I will continue to talk with you. Tao Yuxian looked at Fan Kinjao, who was so well behaved and sensible, and patted her hand distressedly. After the 2 of them sat on the sofa, he said again, It's not peaceful around our mansion now. Your grandfather has left. I'm afraid it won't last long, so I'd better think of a way to hide it. Fan Kinjao took a quilt, covered Tao Yuxian carefully and said, Grandma, don't worry, I have thought of a way. Tao Yuxian was stunned for a moment. She never revealed her hidden danger because she didn't want her husband to have more burdens and worries in her heart when he left. She didn't expect that the child Xiao Kinjao would end up with her. But after thinking about it, Tao Yuxian felt relieved. Her little Kinjao has always been considerate. Fan Kinjao talked with his grandmother for a long time. After coaxing his grandmother to sleep, he got up and left the study. When he returned to the yard, he asked Lang Ya to secretly call Fan Zhao to him. There are too many pairs of eyes hidden around the mansion in the western suburbs now. Even lying to the outside world that my grandfather is sick and recuperating in the mansion is not a long-term solution. he still has to find someone to cover them up. Fan Zhao acted quickly after receiving the order. That night, he found a man with a similar figure to Hua Yaoding from among his brothers. After the others were brought to Fan Qinjiao, I changed my appearance for this man overnight and quietly sent him to my grandfather's study. By the next day, the news spread that Hua Yaoding was sick and had taken leave of absence. There were many people who came to visit at once, including the third prince and his party who came to help Bailey Rongs to inquire. But now Yunyu has long been gone from Bailey Rong's side. No matter how those people pry, no clues can be found. A little later, Bailey Fengming left the palace and came to the western suburbs mansion. He symbolically walked into the study and stayed for a while, then came to Fan Qinjiao's yard. At this time, Fan Qinjiao was sitting on a couch, thinking about something, when he was suddenly hugged from behind. Fan Qinjiao came to his senses in a daze and did not look back. Instead, he just let himself lean into the arms behind him and continued to look at the scenery outside the window. End of this chapter.